So welcome, friends, colleagues, associates, beloved ones, family. Welcome to this beautiful evening in celebration and honor of Stan and Christina Grof, who are beloved by obviously very many of us, and we're here to honor them tonight. So thank you for coming. And as they are so beloved, there's a very long speakers list, because everybody wants to talk about how much they have impacted the lives of all of us so deeply. And we have some wonderful surprises as well as part of the evening. But obviously, befitting the first speaker to kick the evening off, of course, needs no introduction to this crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rick Doblin.
Welcome, everyone. For me to have this opportunity to honor Stan and Christina for the work that they've done over the years, it's, for me, the emotional high point of the conference. And it's also something that comes from years and years of having learned from them and having grown in the process. And it started out when I was 17 years old at college, and I just started taking LSD and realizing that what I had been taught about it at school wasn't true at all, that it had a lot of great potential. But for me, I was really not in a position to fully use it either in a therapeutic way. I was really tightened up in my emotions. I didn't really have much access to my emotions. I was much more of a thinker and kind of emotionally suppressed and really shy. And for me, LSD started to do what my bar mitzvah should have done. But then I kept feeling that the trips kept getting harder and harder for me. And I knew that I just needed to let go and trust the process, but I couldn't do it. And I just would, each successive trip that I would take, it would get to the stuck point sooner and sooner and sooner in the trip, and it just was so disturbing and frustrating to me that I went to the guidance counselor at my college. So by this time I was 18 years old. I had decided that working with LSD was more important than my college education. And so I dropped out of college, and I got to live on campus as a non-student. They all thought that I'd be better off surrounded by my friends. My parents thought so also. And when I went to the guidance counselor, I was utterly blessed that he understood what I was going through, and he gave me a manuscript copy of Realms of the Human Unconscious in 1972. And this book opened up for me this whole doorway to what I wanted to do with my life. That it was a way where I saw science and healing and spirituality and a social mission all in one. And reading this book, it helped me to understand that there was a scientific basis. And I woke up just as all the research was shut down. And it really felt like through... Stan has talked about how psychedelics are for the study of the mind, the way the telescope is for astronomy and the microscope is for biology. And I felt that was really an apt metaphor. And so that's where I decided that I would devote my life to being a psychedelic therapist and a psychedelic researcher, even though the field didn't exist anymore. And then 10 years later, when I was ready to go back to college, the first few days that I was going to go to school, it was really frustrating. I'd been out of school for 10 years, and I was finally there, but I didn't want to be there because there was a workshop at Esalen that Stan and Christina were teaching. And so the college that I went to was promoted off-campus study, and I figured out a way to get credit for going out to Esalen and working with them. And then when I saw the beauty of the holotropic breathwork that Christina and Stan had developed, that there was such an incredibly creative way that they had to move forward, even though the primary tool had been criminalized, that it's not about the drugs, it's about what's inside us, that there's many different ways to bring this out, and one of the most simple and basic ways was through breathing. And then to see how Stan and Christina had developed this whole technique and had also done it in a way where they could have these month-long workshops and bring in speakers and experts from all over the world. The first month-long workshop that I went to was called The Mystical Quest. And it further became for me where the books that I'd been reading became people. I could see, I'd always thought that if you were an author of a book, that you lived in a different universe than I lived in. That I could read books, but I could never imagine how somebody could know so much to create a book. And I also had the thought that this whole community of researchers and therapists, that it was completely wiped out once all this was criminalized. And to discover that there was still this work going on through the breathwork, that there were still people that cared passionately about this. There was this whole new development of MDMA that had sort of blossomed when I didn't even know it was happening. And I learned yet again what I would do with my life through my interaction with Stan and Christina. And then about 2 years later, Christina had worked to develop the Spiritual Emergency Network for people that were going through an emotional crisis that was often pathologized and seen as mental illness. And this Spiritual Emergency Network was a different approach. It was a way to try to help people work through their psychosis, through their struggles, that a lot of it was a spiritual opening rather than, you know, a classic psychotic break. And if you could support people through that, that they could emerge in a much healthier way on the other side and might not even need medication, would really be a more complete and whole person. And so I went through the training with the Spiritual Emergency Network, and it was just another experience where I was able to learn more about how to work with my own psyche, to work with others in a supportive, compassionate, and kind of healing manner. And several days after I came home from that Spiritual Emergency Network workshop, I was contacted by someone who was going through a crisis and was appealing for help. And I felt I'm not qualified, I don't know how to do this, I've had some training, but I'm not in any way a therapist or an expert, and I haven't done all my own work. But it was this moment of, like, your life can go one way or the other. And I knew that if I would have sort of turned away from this situation, that I would have been closed down in a lot of ways. And I was really scared, but I decided to try to be helpful. And it was the first experience that I ever had working with someone who had post-traumatic stress disorder, and working with MDMA and an MDMA-LSD combination. And it ended up being really helpful. And that, in a way, was the genesis of our whole effort with MDMA PTSD research, because I saw that it could work. And it was the strength that I got and the training that I got from Stan and Christina that enabled me to have the courage to try to be helpful. And so I feel at multiple different junctions in my life, Christina and Stan's work has opened the door to me to my future. And so to be able to be here and sort of in a small, tiny way try to, you know, express my gratitude back to the two of you for helping me grow, helping others grow, and it's just been a lifelong growth process and a lifelong challenge and a lifelong pleasure and a blessing to know both of you and to be able to say to you tonight that we love you and that we would like to show how much you've contributed to us, and we'd like to give back some to you tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And I'm sure there's a lot of love. The love is starting to fill the room. And to keep it going, we have Maria Mangini, who's going to come up and share some words as well. So please welcome her to the stage.
I'm delighted to be here as Maria Mangini, but I'm actually two people, and I think probably some of you also know me by my other name, which is Hidden Mountain. And that was the name that I began using when I was in my early part of my friendship with Stan and Christina. I have known them as long as they've known one another. And I was actually the best lady at their wedding. And I'm very delighted to be able to introduce particularly Christina tonight, because I met her when she was first meeting Stan, and I know a little bit about her personal history that I think is not generally known by a lot of people. She's a real natural for the work that she does. She began having unusual experiences and an attraction toward mythology and the sort of spiritual side of her cultural inheritance when she was as young as 7. And although she lived a very conventional life up to the point at which she met Stan and married him, she had had some very spontaneous opportunities to experience unusual states of consciousness. She had had, during the birth of her children, some experiences that were clearly Kundalini events, that were unusual experiences for anybody, but which didn't fit into the cultural context in which she was living. She was the wife of the headmaster of Punahou School, a person who consorted with all the best people, including, this is the educational origin of our current president. And so this was a sort of regular kind of place. And this, you have to think about this. Another female scholar, Betty Eisner, talked about the concept that we're all familiar with, the idea of drug setting as the things that determine what kind of an experience people have. But Betty also addressed the idea that there's a matrix in which people do the things that they do. There's a social environment and a psychological environment that's larger than the one that the person brings to the event, and that does actually have a profound influence on determining the kinds of experiences people have. And this was all happening at a time when the matrix for these kinds of unusual experiences was one of madness. So I think when Christina had some of these kinds of experiences in her own life, there really wasn't a very good context for this. She also was a very serious student of Hatha Yoga. She was, for 35 years, a teacher of Hatha Yoga, and she was one of the first students of Swami Muktananda when he first came to the West, and was a very serious student of his Siddha meditation, which is a meditation practice that facilitates the development of a Kriya event, which is a very profound, physically experienced trembling, rapid breathing, and an uprush of energy that ascends through the spinal column. And so these were things that occurred for her spontaneously in practices that she was doing. But the context, the social context around that was not very forgiving or accommodating or very encouraging for people like that. And then finally, at a certain point, she was involved in a motor vehicle accident. So she had a very direct experience of death and rebirth, or the opportunity to die in which she got to live, but she lived with a mutilation. And this also, I think, was a profoundly disruptive piece of personal history. But because of her college education, where she'd been a student at Sarah Lawrence, where she had the opportunity to work closely with Joseph Campbell because of her interest in art and her interest in mythology, she had the good sense to ask Joseph what she should do with these unusual experiences. And he recommended that she talk with Stan about them. So she came to visit Esalen when I was there in my early days of being there. And Christina's still a quite remarkable person, but at that time she was a physically, really startlingly, incredibly beautiful, voluptuous, gorgeous Highland girl. And I think she and Stan fell in love from the first time they met one another. And he provided the theoretical context for a lot of the experiences that she had had, but she provided the direct life experience of having had a death and rebirth experience, of having had a profoundly transformative childbearing experience, of having had a meditation practice that was productive of an unusual kind of state of consciousness. And I think that what we see here tonight is the marriage of those two wellsprings of personal experience, theoretical experience, spiritual experience, the development of all the other things that I know that other speakers are going to address here tonight came from the interpenetration of all those life experiences. And I was fortunate that I was present at the inception, so I'm very glad to be here now. And you all know how much I love and honor you both. And I'm going to be delighted to hear what everybody else has to say.
We invite Tav and Carrie Sparks to the stage to share their journey with the Grofs as well. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Carrie Sparks, and Rick asked Tav, my husband, and I to say a few words about a very special and inspirational person, and someone who we both love very much, and who has been a significant part of our lives for about the last 25 years, and that person is Christina Grof. So we're going to talk a little more about Christina, and maybe we wanted to fill in some of the biographical pieces that you might not have heard already, and just to make sure that they get covered, because she's done so many wonderful things. But we also wanted to really quickly acknowledge Rick for the incredible work that he's done over the past 25 years also, and putting maps on the map, and to congratulate him and everyone who's a part of the MAPS journey. And really, there's a lot to celebrate here, because it's a change of consciousness in the entire culture, and it's only going to get better over time. So thanks, Rick, wherever you are, for your tenacity and your vision. I met Christina in 1986 in Austin, Texas, in a ballroom much like this one. And we were there for a holotropic breathwork workshop, which was something that I already had a great passion for. So I was really excited that I was going to get to meet Christina, and also that other guy, you know, Stan. And while, you know, Christina's acknowledged for co-creating that work, and overall for the whole work, also I wanted to make a special mention of the fact that she's also the maestro of the music piece of that. The music is a really important part of the breathwork, and you know, no one who's been to a breathwork, a holotropic session where Christina's done the music, nobody could forget the sight of her at the music controls with all the music laid out around her. Like, it used to be cassette tapes, and of course now it's the CDs. And you know, that you kind of could think of it as like NASA Control Center, only instead of sending up one rocket, it's like 75 or 100 rockets at a time. You've already heard about Christina growing up in Hawaii and going to Sarah Lawrence and studying intensely with Joseph Campbell, and also that she became close friends with Joe and his wife Jean over the years. She taught art, creative writing, and yoga, and was a very a significant student of the late Swami Muktananda Paramahansa, the head of the Siddha Yoga lineage. And she has and continues to explore many spiritual practices, including Buddhist Vipassana meditation. Another point that's interesting is that in 1976, Christina, along with Stan, facilitated a training program where they gave psychedelic sessions to a staff at the Donwood Institute for Addiction Treatment in Toronto in preparation for a study using LSD with the patients there. Christina has published several books: The Thirst for Wholeness, Attachment, Addiction, and the Spiritual Path, and several co-written or co-edited with Stan, Beyond Death, Spiritual Emergency, When Personal Transformation Becomes a Crisis, The Stormy Search for the Self, and last year, Holotropic Breathwork. and she's working on 2 more books. Christina's an amazing artist, and she's working on a memoir, but also she's going to be putting out a book of her paintings, and she does a really incredible slideshow of her work that is, if you ever get a chance to see it, but sooner or later it'll be out in the book and you'll get to read that. She's been interviewed numerous radio shows, TV shows, had articles written about her, has 2 honorary PhDs, one from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, and was also recently given the Christina Grof Award for contributions to holotropic breathwork from the Association for Holotropic Breathwork. And just quickly, I'd like to mention a couple of the wonderful things that have always struck me personally about Christina. She's an amazingly poised and gracious person, and it manifests in multiple ways. She has very deep kindness for people, great thoughtfulness for family and friends, but also for strangers, people who just come up to her at workshops, have been inspired by seeing or hearing her work and want to talk to her, and she's always giving them time. She's always there to support them. She doesn't just write or talk about a topic, she really lives it. She's down to earth as a person and is just as real as she appears. And she's also a lot of fun. Guess who throws marshmallows at the TV during the Oscars? Guess who brought 50 helium balloons to our house for Tav's birthday? Guess who kept airline barf bags in the back seat of her car, and the car was named Harrison, as in Ford? When our son was little, she's his godmother. She brought over an incredible hand-painted toy box, and then another time a boy doll that she had sewn about this big, sewed by hand in all the clothes, including perfectly anatomically correct boy parts. So anyway, I'm going to get down and give Tav a turn here, but I want to say thank you, Christina, for being a terrific friend, a soul sister, a supporter, a role model, and for giving me an opportunity to do what's become for me also a life's work. Girlfriend, I think it's safe to say we've got each other's backs.
Thanks, Carrie. I want to thank Rick also and all the people at MAPS for the work over the years that is playing such a large part, I believe, and many of us believe, in the transformation of our planet. We're in a rough spot. We need something radical. You guys are doing it. Thank you very much. And I'm also beyond honored to be here for you, Christina. Our lives have been intertwined now for about 25 or more years, and it's been one of the most important things in my life. I cannot imagine what it would be like to have lived this time without you in my life. Brother David Stendelrast, who's one of our teachers, many of our teachers, says that gratitude is a power, and that just to feel gratitude itself is transformational. And if that's the case, I'm getting mighty high this evening because I'm really filled with gratitude for you and your husband, Stan. Thank you so much for everything. Most of the biographical material has been done. I'm going to say something from my heart in a second, but there's just one more thing I want to add, and there may be some other things that people will say. Let's see, and I'm going to read this, and this you will see in a lot of bios, everybody, but it's really an important work for both Christina and myself that we have shared for over 2 decades. Christina's current area of interest is the spiritual aspects of chemical dependency and other forms of addiction and recovery, as well as the relationship between sexual abuse and other forms of trauma on the development of addiction. She has also spent many years focusing on, as already been said, on the relationship between mysticism and psychosis and the treatment of transformative crisis, and the name she gave to this was spiritual emergencies, and she's written and spoken, obviously, extensively on this subject. So there's probably some other biographical things, but I want to say something from my heart if I can. I want to say that I'm just going to read this because I don't know if I could say it any better. I wrote it in a moment of halfway clarity. She has been and is a living creative fire behind the ITA conference movement and an essential presence and spokesperson for the presentation of the transpersonal perspective through the worldwide conferences. I don't see how it could have happened without you, Christina, in the way that it has. She's also one of the principal architects of holotropic breathwork, as we know. And besides being an architect or creator of the music principle, I remember my training and the early days that I spent watching you with eagle eyes on the floor and studying everything that you did with the breather and the way that you honored them and you empowered them to find their own inner healing presence, which is the cornerstone of this work. And I saw you do this, and I listened to everything you said and watched how you did it. And what I felt from you at this point was presence, a presence. And presence is a multi-dimensional word. It has to do with just being present. So that's one level of it. But also carrying a presence, which has to do with going through multiple ego deaths, I believe, and having some other greater force of yourself coming through. And this is what you showed people. This is what I carried away from you. And I have to tell you that when I teach this in the world now, all around the world, one of the intangibles that we teach is facilitator presence. And I'm always thinking of you during that time. I also want to just say a couple more things that I've written down, if I may, and then I'm going to talk just about one little short story, if I may. Christina is a conscious alchemical explorer of transformation. Transformation is not in her head. She breathes it, she lives it, she dives in and goes all the way with it. She lives the transformational dream every day. She is the yoga, and she walks the talk. Okay. And I'd like to share one story. I was coming back from Tasmania on a flight the other day. We had done a module down there, and we were flying from Hobart then to Sydney, and I ended up sitting beside a woman who was certified in the breathwork, a wonderful person who's going to be a real leader in this work. And she turned to me and said, "Tav, what is Christina like?" And I just was like this, and all of a sudden I realized it, and it was something I have felt for decades now. There are a whole lot of wonderful people out there in the holotropic perspective who have not met you, and this isn't your fault because there's been all kinds of physical reasons why you could not travel. But I have to tell you that people are constantly thinking of you and your contribution, and the times that you have made it to the training in Europe and the various places, when you walk into the room, there's a palpable quiet, a silence, a presence that is felt. People are focused on you. You are absolutely essential to the holotropic perspective, and people hang on every word that you say. Now, I want to say also then that to the very best of our ability, we try then to somehow come close to carrying the spirit that you would be doing if you were there in those trainings face to face, and we try to carry this. And I realize that what this woman shared with me, I hear from people all over the world. What is Christina like? And you're going to think this is woo-woo, but what I said at that point, and I thought about all the biographical things and all the awards and the achievements, which are many, which I could say. And I said, well, Christina is a goddess. And I just, the only thing I could think of to say. And I was reminded then of something you shared about what Mutananda used to call you, which was Shakti, the power of the feminine. And this was what has been so essential all these years in the holotropic breathwork. And I want to say one more thing. There's a Sufi prayer called Toward the One, the Perfection of Love, Harmony, and Beauty. And I want to say that you embody this perfection, this moving toward love, harmony, and beauty. And this is what is entirely in your house. I feel it everywhere. Let me just read this. Your home is the temple of the aesthetic, and you have the green thumb, girl. You are a green woman of spring. Plants and flowers jump all over themselves to grow in front of you, and deer climb across your roof. And you embrace and uplift every guest that comes there in your home as a sacred wanderer who has come home. And that's what it feels like to be in your presence. And some other spiritual person says, if you want to know how spiritual somebody is, ask their husband, ask their family, ask their friends, what are they like behind the scenes? And you are the real deal. Christina, you rock. Thank you for everything. I love you.
Welcome to the stage. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, good. In 1981, I had the great fortune to spend a month with Stan and Christina. little did I know that I would end up getting Shaktipat. Shaktipat kind of refers in Hinduism to the conferring of energy upon one person by another. And here, this energy came also with a lot, and I mean a lot, of knowledge. And it was more than a contact high. The magic of Stan and Christina rubbed off, and like so many here tonight, that encounter transformed my life. I spent several years with them, traveling, getting trained, and observing their hands-on work. I work with clients from all over the world, clients that have been labeled with every possible psychiatric and psychological disorder. I also work with people exploring suffering, old age, and death. I have, for the last 30 years, used Stan and Christina's methods, and I'm still in awe by the transformative power of their tools and their teachings. What impresses me to this day is the hands-on work, working in the trenches, work that facilitates a true and lasting, yes, a lasting transformation and a healing. Their methods work, even in cases that are regarded hopeless by traditional psychology and psychiatry. They also give us a comprehensive intellectual body of work, which I found absolutely necessary in my practice. It is extremely helpful in my work that they transcended Western psychology. Their writings and trainings went beyond any traditional psychological training, truly bridging ancient wisdom cultures with modern research. By embracing such diverse traditions as Tantra, Buddhism, Shamanism, by embracing astrology and modern physics, Stan and Christina have revitalized psychology. Like Carl Jung before them, they brought soul and the mystical back into the field of psychology. Spending time at Burning Man and introducing Stan and Christina's work to young people, I can see how this is beginning to transform another generation. And I like to quote Marie-Louise von France. I think what she said about Carl Gustav Jung applies to you, Stan and Christina. There are few in each century who live lives of such wide-ranging, long-lasting effects that they serve as creative influences, not only within their own social and professional cycles, but throughout the broad spectrum of fields of human endeavor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
When Shiloh and I were asked to say some words for Stan and Christina, I thought, how do we do this? How do I do this? And so I thought about it for a while, and I thought, I'm going to write you a letter, and I'm going to write you a love letter. So here it is. My dearest Christina and Stan, when we first met, I was on a PhD track at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in Menlo Park. Part of my work there was to answer incoming calls at the SEN office. SEN, or the Spiritual Emergence Network, started by you, Christina, was a support network for those in the process of spiritual awakening, often a difficult process. As part of SEN, I was asked to attend a weekend of holotropic breathwork, which you both were offering. I had no idea what to expect, but my first image of the two of you remains sweet and fresh. You were snugly curled against one another on the floor mats in the dojo. As we gathered that evening, late in September of 1986, I was little prepared for how reality was about to shift. In that first breath work, I found myself dressed in an opulent robe, a cobra of gold wrapped securely around my forehead, lying tightly entombed in a sarcophagus. The scene played in Egypt where my king had died, and I was to accompany him to the other world. It certainly was a new take on Till Death Do Us Part. I was, to say the least, blown away. How could listening to music, a little heavy breathing, while blindfolded, unleash times of kings and queens, sarcophagi, and pyramids in faraway Egypt? The weekend left me wanting more understanding of the seemingly simple process, and more contact with you both. I would get my wish. Through a series of incredibly fortunate and synchronistic events, I became your Grof transpersonal training coordinator for the West and East Coast 3-year-long trainings, the first in the United States. I was privileged to feel details and personalities of the trainings, as well as fully participate for those 5 years as your student. I treasure the gift of the t-shirt you presented me with the words, "Dyslexics of the world, untie." I think it was several months before I got, it didn't say "Dyslexics of the world, untie." It didn't say "Dyslexics of the world, unite." I'm still doing it, and I still can't spell. I accompanied you over the US and Europe during the holotropic breathwork events, soaking up wonderfully, deliciously subversive lectures, challenging psychiatry, psychology, physiology, psychedelics, cosmology, astrology, and mysticism, and on. And fortunate to be among the few people who joined you, Stan, and Carl Sagan for an off-the-record discussion at Harvard on the nature of the universe. The concept of spirit seemed untenable to Sagan, if my memory serves me right. As part of the Grof transpersonal team for 5 years, I watched you, Christina, mistress of music, wield your magic. I still hear the rhythm of your sessions. You handled difficult interpersonal issues with grace and sensitivity. You became a published author, deepened commitment to your AA practice, and furthered the Spiritual Emergence Network. One of my favorite images of you, Stan, is shucking oysters with Shiloh at Hollyhock. Another was waking on a long flight to Findhorn in Scotland to see you reading by the small light in the plane. Reading, Stan, you are always reading. Always. By the end of those 5 years, I had been ruined in the best transpersonal sense of the word. Ruined to even dreaming that I could become a part of an established therapeutic model. I could no more be a traditional psychotherapist than I could will my hair to straighten. Fairly impossible. The way I see it, you are directly responsible for my marriage to Shiloh, whose mind and sense of aesthetics reminds me so much of the vastness you are, Stan. So much so, occasionally, I have to say, Shiloh, dude, you are going beyond the brain, wandering in the realms of the unconscious. It's time to move beyond birth and death. Go and play a cosmic game, and for God's sakes, breathe. And then there is the workshop participants yelling at the top of their lungs during breathwork weekends, making it imperative to live far from neighbors. We now live in the Sierra foothills, where the neighbors are bear, mountain lion, coyote, squirrel. They are delighted with the loud music and all the yelling. Your influence has centered the work I do on liberation, often with women seeking to contact or deepen creative essence. Using extraordinary states, sometimes breathwork, or perhaps time out in nature under a star-filled sky. And then there are the conversations with the plant teachers, as well as support for one learning to ride Albert Hoffman's bicycle. All revealing soul, all unlocking creativity. So now, Stan and Christina, I have to thank you for my East Coast middle-class housewife life, taking a sudden left-hand turn onto a magical path that I might not have found on my own wanderings. My work is deep and passionate. My art, well, just plain psychedelic. Nature literally speaks to me. Best of all, I married a man who adores extraordinary states and our work together. So I want to end this love letter with deep gratitude for you both, for both of you, for your work, for your dedication to liberation and healing, to the path that you have walked together, and to give thanks to the Great Spirit for bringing us together in 1986. And finally, gratitude for all the moments, for all the time to have absorbed the Shakti pot you both carry. May your lives be blessed for the next 80 years and beyond. Hugs and kisses, Ameo, a.k.a. Pat McAllister.
We have next up Rick Tarnas coming up, who's Stan's friend. Tell us a little bit.
I think I'll just say two things to keep things short. One is a statement that Stan said to me the very first time that I heard him give a lecture at Esalen in the early 1970s. And we were talking about the challenge of very difficult LSD sessions that people can get into, and how do you handle the crises, the terror, the panic that can spiral into a very problematic place. And, you know, I think almost everyone in this room can appreciate in retrospect the courage that it took for Stan in those early years when there were no maps for Western psychiatrists to be entering into this realm, this volcano of consciousness transformation in a molecule that LSD represents. And for him to have basically worked day after day with individuals in the crucible of their psyche, and for him himself to have entered into that as bravely as he did, and to come through it in such a way that he was able in some sense to convey to thousands of people a trust in the deep psyche, a trust in the capacity of the soul to go through a transformation in which the most horrific contractions of consciousness could in fact be leading towards a unexpected expansion and deepening of awareness that was available through no other way than through dying to an old mode of being. And he had a trust somehow in the experience of death, that it could lead to new life. And he was able to synthesize Western depth psychology, Freud and Jung, Rank and Ferenczi, Klein and Reich, but he's also able to synthesize East and West and the great shamanic traditions and the ancient mystery religions. And perhaps most significantly, he was able to bring this into the world in a way that he could communicate and help others find that trust in themselves to be able to enter into the underworld of the deep psyche and to go through a transformation that could lead to a spiritual rebirth. That's a great gift. So I asked him at this first lecture that I ever heard him give, I said, what do you do with these cases? I had worked in the Haight-Ashbury drug clinic many years ago, and we confront that kind of thing. And he said, the full experience of an emotion, the full experience of a negative emotion is the funeral pyre of that emotion. And in that one sentence, he poetically captured really what's condensed into it, like the whole perinatal theory, that basically even the experience of hell, which is a state of seemingly endless suffering, if you surrender to it, that you'll never get out, that sense that you'll never get out, that is precisely the way through, and that all suffering, as Nietzsche put it, all pain is birth pain. All pain is birth pain. That's Nietzsche's summary of the ancient mystery religions, but in some ways, it's the summary of Stan's entire psychology and psychotherapy. I'd like to thank you, Stan, for all you've given to us. It's an incomparable gift, and I know it was based on an extraordinarily heroic life. Thank you.
Now that you're fed, I notice everyone's paying attention, so that's great. Thank you. Next, we have Tom Roberts coming up, a personal friend, to share us some stories. Thank you.
When Joseph Campbell talks about the hero's journey, he mentions there's an invitation to the journey that good heroes accept. The journey itself, which is facing dangers, overcoming them, and then the hero brings back a boon. In most of the experiences of the people in this room, I expect, psychedelics have been the invitation. We have dived down into the ocean of our underconscious, fought the jungles of fear, and brought back some boons. So in a sense, we've all been through the hero's journey. What I'd like you to do is to recognize that probably everybody in this room qualifies as a psychedelic, psychological hero or heroine. I'd like you to look at the other people at your table and recognize you're sitting with a table of heroes and heroines. Then look around the room at the other tables. This is a room filled of tables of heroes and heroines. I expect we all have our boons that we brought back to our villages and our families and our friends. I want to point out some boons that I think are neglected from Stan and Christina's work. One is that inventing a new way of exploring the mind is a noble achievement. Inventing 2 ways is a remarkable achievement. Inventing 3 is absolutely amazing. And we have holotropic breathwork, psychedelic work with psychedelics, and the full, strong psychedelic experience. And these 3 open the paths for more adventures for us and for other people. There are a few more boons I'd like to mention, which I would call sort of high-yield ideas. I think the aspect of recognizing the Grofs' work in psychotherapy is well known, but the intellectual and scholarly work that remains to be done is sort of hiding in the closet. This is probably a good strategy, and I think MAPS has done a very good job of doing this. When Rick and I were talking about organizing this organization, we should wonder, should we call it cross-disciplinary or transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary, and Rick came up with multidisciplinary. Stan's work is really multidisciplinary, and what's been developed so far is largely the therapeutic work. And this is what's well known, this is what most of the sessions at this conference are, and the sessions last April in San Jose are. But there are whole other ways of developing these ideas that have yet to be developed. Let me just recommend maybe my favorite. It's an article called The Perinatal Roots of Wars, Revolution, and Totalitarianism. As the title indicates, Stan spots how our own birth experiences give us a short fuse for aggression and war. And if we're going to overcome that aggression and overcome the war, it'll be helped very much to be in touch with that fuse and, in fact, to remove it. A couple other items is that a science advances when different parts of it are integrated. And the items that Rick just mentioned, the different types of psychologies being integrated, is a major advance in psychology. This provides lots of new research for opportunities for research. Things that didn't used to be researchable are now researchable through experimental procedures. Things like sacredness, meaningfulness, truth, intensity of perception, timelessness, aggression, altruism. All of these used to be studied by reading, by philosophers, by armchair work. It's now possible to look at those things in an experimental direction. This is the direction I think that MAPS could take, although I think they've got enough to do right now with psychotherapy, but still that possibility is there. One final thing. Edward O. Wilson, a well-known biologist, has used the idea called consilience. Consilience is the idea of taking various levels of science, starting with particle physics and going up through physics and chemistry and biology, and going up and finally getting into abstractions. This is a desire that comes back every 30 or 40 years in the sciences, and he calls it consilience. Psychedelics are remarkably well oriented toward doing this. Just think, we can put a chemical, or somebody take a chemical, and that's the chemical input. We can find out what's going on in the nervous system, in the brain, and the rest of the body, and the output is likely to be a sense of sacredness, or altruism, or change in values. So put an experimental variable in one level and get it out the others. This is the way to work out the scaffolding of ideas. So there's an enormous area to go, carrying on Christina and Stan's work further in the intellectual, scholarly domain. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for reminding us all of the collective power and beauty of the people in this room, heroes and heroines. Let's invite up Roger Walsh and Francis Vaughn, who are ready to take the stage. Give them a round of applause, everyone. Thank you.
It's now about half a century since psychedelics exploded on the Western culture, a culture that was utterly unprepared for them. And these substances unleashed a Pandora's box of highs and hells, of heavens and hells, and trivia and transcendence, for which we were just totally unprepared. And they shaped culture and counterculture. They have led to movements, peace movements, social rights movements. At the time there was an enormous amount of hype. There was talk of a new age, a new human being, and the age of Aquarius. It wasn't to be at that time, but what we learned was that we had seriously underestimated in our hopes with the psychedelics. We seriously underestimated just how challenging human transformation is, both individual and collective. We underestimated the amount of psychological and social inertia. We underestimated the power of psychological defenses. We underestimated the extent of cultural resistance. So the initial assumption that there would be immediate and widespread transformation was not to be. And we really came to appreciate that human transformation is a much more profound, a much more demanding, and a much more long-during process than we'd assumed. And that it really came with considerable challenges. But fortunately, we had people who were willing to do whatever it took to help guide us through these transitions. And two of the most important, two of the people who've had most impact, two of the people who've impacted each and every one of us were Stan and Christina. Now I'm focusing on the challenges that the psychedelics brought us because first it's important to acknowledge them, but secondly, it brings us to some of the key contributions that these two people have made. In my own original naivete, I had assumed that transformation would be pretty easy and that mature people didn't really screw up. Now I realize that everyone screws up, but mature people clean up and they grow up. Now, the person who exemplifies this best for me is Christina, because 20 years ago she called Francis and me to say she was in treatment for alcoholism and was very open about that process. Now, most people with alcoholism, if they're lucky, recover. But Christina not only recovered, she went on to turn her experience into a teaching and into a movement. She wrote The Thirst for Wholeness, which really revisioned alcoholism as a side effect of the spiritual quest. Not only that, she started having difficult spiritual experiences as part of her inner work, and as a result of that, went on to create the whole field of spiritual emergencies and the Spiritual Emergence Network. I know of no one, but no one else, who has gone through two major psychological spiritual crises and turned them both into teachings and social movements. And Stan, well, what do you say about a man who's not only created one of the most comprehensive maps of the human psyche in history, but has also created a map of creation? It's a little challenging. And what's also amazing is to realize that Stan has probably witnessed more powerful and profound experiences than any other human being in history. Now, a psychiatrist might see a few dozen panic attacks, some existential crises, A Zen master might see a couple of dozen Satoris if he's lucky. But Stan has seen literally hundreds, if not thousands of these. There's literally no one in human history who's seen such an array of powerful, profound, and transformative experiences as Stan has. And from this, he synthesized this extraordinarily comprehensive map of the human psyche, integrating, as Rick said, not only the Western psychologies of Freud and Jung and Adler and Reich, but the great contemplative traditions as well, the great religious traditions, all the way from shamanic through to yogic and Buddhist and Kashmir Shaivism. This is an extraordinary synthesis. And even more extraordinary, he created a map of reality, the cosmic game. So the New Age didn't flower, but something else did. Anthropologists recognize two kinds of cultures, monophasic cultures and polyphasic cultures. Monophasic cultures are cultures which recognize and honor and draw from only one state of consciousness, the usual waking state. Polyphasic cultures are ones which draw from multiple states, waking state, dreaming state, altered states, psychedelic states, spiritual states. Our culture is transitioning from a monophasic to a polyphasic culture. And that is a transition which is rarely recognized, but which is of extraordinary importance, because it makes available to us for the first time in the Western world the full depths of the human psyche, the full varieties of states of consciousness, the full inner resources and guidance. All these become now available to us through our culture's shift to a recognition of the full range of potentials of human consciousness. This is a priceless gift which our culture has not yet fully recognized. But two of the people who have helped birth this transformation which we're now going to are Stan and Christina Grof, and we are all of us here, all of us in this culture, deeply indebted to them. Thank you so much.
Well, I would like to say, just to add a personal footnote to what Roger has talked about, that it's been a great privilege to know Stan and Christina for all these years. I first met Stan at a conference on altered states of consciousness 40 years ago in 1971. And I was on my way to becoming a transpersonal psychologist. And then I met Christina when she first came out to California to go to Esalen. And in the intervening years, we've had the great good fortune of sharing many, many good times with Stan and Christina at Esalen, and then all around the world, thanks to the ITA, where we carry the messages of transpersonal psychology to various places on this planet. And it's just been an amazing and wonderful journey. I consider it such a blessing in my life to have had the opportunity to have Stan and Christina as colleagues and friends, and to appreciate so much the vast network of relationships that they've formed. I find it so inspiring to see how the holotropic breathwork is all over the world. I love that little map which showed all the places where it was happening when everyone was breathing together. And it seems to me that we have all been privileged to live in this time, to share this time of transition. And with all the ups and downs and bumps on the road, it just having good friends and good colleagues makes such a difference. So I just want to express my gratitude and say thank you, thank you. Thank you for all the contributions you've made to our collective well-being and to our personal lives as well. It's really been a privilege to know you and to have been with you through thick and thin for these many years. So much gratitude to you. Thank you, thank you.
And I'm just going to immediately welcome our next speaker, Richard Jensen. Please welcome him to the stage.
Well, I first met Stan in 1970, I believe. But I wanted to outline for you the phase of his life that I was most intensely involved with him for. He arrived in the United States in 1967, having received a Foundation's Fund in Psychiatry fellowship at Johns Hopkins University. He was already perhaps the most experienced psychedelic researcher in the world. 1,600 sessions he had run by that time himself, and he had access to 900 more. And out of that, he forged some of the powerful ideas that people have been talking about that affect us all, that are transformative in their nature, and powerful because of the way they empower healers to understand processes of transformation, to contain in a crucible of understanding and kindness the very depth of dissolution, death, and suffering, so that people can transcend those states and come through to beauty, love, meaning, and wholeness. Having arrived in the United States on August 21st, 1968, the Russian tanks rolled into Prague. I always thought that was a great tragedy, but there is an upside to it. It helped Stan decide to stay with us here in this country. He joined the Spring Grove group at Cottage 13 on the grounds of Spring Grove State Hospital. Al Kurland, Charlie Savage, Unger, Pankey, among others. And then in 1969, the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center was launched. Governor Spiro T. Agnew presiding. It was a beautiful 4-story, multi-million-dollar building with a 200-person auditorium below, a sensory isolation tank in the basement, and a mini computer. And it was conceived as a place to study psychedelics, as a multidisciplinary center where people exploring the Amazon could send plants to be understood in terms of their active ingredients, where in the basement in the basic sciences division, science could be done on the pharmacologic qualities of the active ingredients in these plants, and where in the clinical sciences division we could work together to understand their usefulness in helping individuals who were suffering or facing different issues of difficulty in their lives. Almost immediately, there began to be compromises. The state of Maryland had a hiring policy that you had to hurry up and hire people. If you didn't hire people within a 6-month window, you would lose the position. So there were many thoughtless appointments made in a hurry to fill positions. One of them was very thoughtful. Stan became the chief of psychiatric research. Another one, Walter Pankey, became the director of the clinical sciences division. During the MPRC years, Stan was involved with the professional training program, a program that allowed qualified mental health professionals to have exposures to up to 400 micrograms of LSD on 3 different occasions. He was involved in alcoholism studies with LSD, He was involved in developing new psychedelic drugs, MDA, DOET, DPT. He was involved with neurotic studies, a referred patient program, heroin addicts, cancer patients, and then tragically struck. In 1971, Walter Pankey died in a tragic scuba diving accident. In 1971, Stan also brought me to the research center. Thank you very much, Stan. One of the most meaningful experiences of my life and one of the great privileges of my life, to be your student, to watch you work, to get to film your sessions, even if all of those recordings are gone now, and to spend time with you. To know that the man with such a great mind, with such an all-encompassing intellect, has a sweet and kind heart and nature. I think by 1973, Stan had had enough questioning about whether we could proceed and how we might proceed, enough questioning about how many sessions we might be able to give, enough difficulty. And he was invited to be a scholar in residence at Esalen Institute and to begin a new chapter in his life, which ultimately has involved taking his work to the world. Thank you for doing that, Stan.
Thank you for that tribute. So next up we have Michael Mithofer. Come on up, and MAPS researcher. Give him a round of applause, please.
Thanks. Well, a little over 20 years ago, at a point when I'd been practicing emergency medicine for 10 years and I was no longer enjoying my work, I realized I needed a change in my career, and I didn't know what to do, but I figured, there must be something interesting I could do with a medical degree. So I started looking for physicians that were doing something interesting, which was not easy to find in my mind. And I came upon a blurb about Stan Grof in a magazine. So I thought, So I went to the university library, the medical school, and they had Beyond the Brain in the library. So I took it out, and I noticed in the back there were no stamps. No one else had taken it out before. So I took that home, and when I read that book, Stan, it was like a pivotal point in my life, it turned out. It resonated so deeply for me. It gave me understanding of my own psychedelic experiences from the 60s. And I decided this is what I need to pursue. So I thought, well, Stan's a psychiatrist. I'll apply to psychiatry residency, and I'll apply to the Grof holotropic breathwork transpersonal training at the same time. So I ended up doing those simultaneously. And what I experienced was what I was learning from Stan and Christina's training was so much more sophisticated, profound, wise, and compassionate than what I was learning in my psychiatry training, that I've been pursuing that ever since. And then a few years later, after Annie, my wife, went through a period of thinking I was being kidnapped by a cult in California, she finally went to the breathwork and did the training herself. So in the model that we've learned from Stan and Christina, we've been working together as male-female therapists ever since, and it's been incredible for our lives and our relationship. And the work we're doing now with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy would definitely not be happening if I hadn't read that book. And I feel tremendous gratitude. When we're in difficult situations with people in the MDMA work, it's what we learned about trusting the process and the inner healer that we've learned directly from Stan and Christina and Tav and Tylea and Lori and the people in the training helping us do our own work. That's what informs everything we do now. So, our work and our career has directly come from what you've given us. So I just want to thank you, Stan and Christina, for all that you've given to us and to so many people. It's really incredible, and I so appreciate this chance to thank you.
And please welcome Charles Grof to the stage for some more remarks.
So it's a privilege here to be here this evening to honor Stan and Christina. They've had an enormous impact on my life, on my career. Dating back some 40 years ago, I had left college somewhat prematurely and was living in New York City, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, there's an interesting lecturer tonight speaking at the meeting of the Association of Humanistic Psychology." So I had nothing else to do, so I went, and it was Stan speaking about his remarkable work in Maryland, working with people with terminal cancer and people who had overwhelming existential anxiety, and with whom he facilitated an LSD session or a DPT session, and reported quite remarkable transformations and reduction of anxiety, improved mood, improved quality of life, and I was just really floored by the work he was doing. And I thought about it, and at that time my father had a lot of concerns about my apparent lack of direction. And he said, "Son, when you figure out what you want to do with your life, and I don't care what time of the day or night it is, call me." So there I am late at night, thinking over what I had heard from Stan, and I just couldn't resist. It was 2 in the morning, but he had said, call him, doesn't matter what time. So I called and said, "Dad, I think I've got it. I think I figured it out. I've heard this remarkable lecture tonight by this doctor from Maryland, Dr. Stanislav Grof, and he talked about his psychedelic research, and it just seems like such a fascinating way to learn more about the brain, the mind-brain interface, learn more about mental illness, and there are these remarkable treatment models that he's been employing in his program, first in Czechoslovakia and then in Spring Grove." And my dad, who was, I think, quite a wise man, said, "Well, son, there may be something to what you're saying. And this Dr. Grof sounds very interesting, but no one will ever listen to you unless you get your credentials." So I knew at that moment I had to go back to school. So, I thank Stan for my direction, and my dad was always very appreciative that you got me going back to school. So, I went to medical school, and I was rather floored by the dryness and the lack of compassion that I often observed. And then once in the end of second year, we all had an assignment, each of us in the medical class, to identify an article in the research literature in medicine and present it to the class. So I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I had already gotten a copy of Stan's wonderful article in the International Journal of Pharmacopsychiatry presenting his work at Spring Grove, and I presented it to my class, but at this point it was in the late 70s, and nobody wanted to talk about psychedelics. In fact, after I gave that talk, nobody wanted to talk to me. But, I hung in there and, plugged away, and I went into medical training. I then went into neurology training, and I just was not happy and I seemed to have lost connection with what had really, grabbed my passion and gave me a sense of empowerment to go to school in the first place. And one day I'm just kind of walking haphazardly through the Stanford Medical Bookstore, and there it was on the shelf, Stan's first 2 books, Realms of Human Unconscious and human encounters with death. And I grabbed them. I paid for them, of course, but took them home. I spent the entire weekend reading those two books, and I knew by the end of that weekend I had to go into psychiatry because that was the way to do this work. So Stan's example, the remarkable work he did, empowered me to do the work that I've been doing, empowered my colleagues at the Research Institute and my colleagues in MAPS to really pick up the ball again when it was possible in the 90s and the 2000s to get psychedelic research back on track. We owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Stan and the amazing work he did. Richard and Roger pointed out the magnitude of his early studies in Czechoslovakia and at Maryland, and Stan, without a doubt, studied more psychedelic treatment sessions in a sanctioned context than anyone else in history. And he really created the foundation for which today's work is moving forward and which tomorrow's work, the young people here and elsewhere, will take the torch and move forward again. So Stan and Christina, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all you've done.
Thank you, Charles, for putting that in context of how many people you've inspired, even who went to medical school with you. So amazing. One of our last speakers are being towards the end of the evening, so thank you all for your interest. Ingrid Pacey, welcome her to the stage.
I feel very honored with the rest of the speakers tonight to be acknowledging the work of Christina and Stan and all the gifts that you've given so many of us over these many years. I was a student of Stan's and Christina's from 1987 to 1990, and I did have the fortune of having Christina as one of the teachers in those days, and also the fortune of being in the training when we had the same group that met twice a year for 3 years and really had an amazing training and exposure to both Stan and Christina. It feels almost as if we had a transmission from you and really being able to have that much contact with each of you in really taking on the work that you were teaching with holotropic breathwork. So my first introduction to Stan's work was in 1986, where just on fluke, like many of you it seems, someone suggested I go to this workshop called The Hero's Journey at Hollyhock on an island off the coast of British Columbia. And it was mind-blowing. I was a psychiatrist, I finished my psychiatry residency, I'd explored gestalt therapy, bioenergetics, Jungian work, really looking for what was going to be my path in this world of psychiatry. As someone else mentioned, there's a certain dryness to medicine and a certain dryness to psychiatry. So to really get involved in a method that was as juicy and that really gave that full range of people's feelings, their physical bodies, their spiritual, was just felt like a homecoming to me. Before I'm old enough that I went to medical school when LSD was still legal. So I saw LSD being given to patients on the psychiatric ward, and my own first experience with LSD was participating in a group where half the patients were given LSD, and I was one of the people given LSD. And I remember this extraordinary day of incredible emotion, and I remember even more vividly the next day, where suddenly it felt like the world was clear and clean, and there was simplicity. And even though that level of understanding didn't necessarily stay, it was still something I remember with some clarity, and always felt I could go back to. So then coming on this journey to then experiencing the training of holotropic breathwork, it was another way of reaching that place of clarity and union that I'd experienced so many years ago. The other gift of my training with Stan was that my passion in my work had always been working with women and some men who were survivors of early childhood trauma. And so with my training, I then spent nearly 14 years working primarily with trauma survivors, women with dissociative disorders, and really could feel how working in a group context, the women having the support of that group context, but also this experience of moving into that altered state to really reach the healing that telling their story or having inside support in an office was something that could never happen. So they were fabulous years, and I felt so honored really to be able to bring this work and do the work with these women. And now it feels like I've been given another gift, because as I have aged, doing holotropic breathwork became more difficult, because as some of you know, it's an enormously physically and emotionally taxing thing to be doing. So as it felt like that part of my career was slowly waning, I was at a holotropic breathwork reunion, and Rick came up to me and he said, kind of like, what are you doing these days? And I really had, I was taking a year and a half off because I really had burned myself out. And he started talking about MDMA, working with PTSD, and really that early experience I had with LSD came back to me. And it feels now that I've been able to come this whole full circle, and now I'm involved with, hopefully, coming to a point where we will be doing MDMA research with PTSD people in Canada. The biggest trial right now is that we're doing this 3-year dance with Health Canada as they try to figure out more hoops for us to jump through before they let us import at first a teeny bottle of MDMA so we can start doing sessions. And I hope that it will happen really soon. So I thank you, Stan, for really being such a pivotal person in both the work that you did with psychedelics, the work you and Christina did in bringing holotropic breathwork, giving us a way of working with non-ordinary states when using drugs was not available. And also, there is still a great magic around holotropic breathwork. It is a fantastic method. It's a fantastic thing, I think, for everyone to experience. And I hope everybody who ends up really working as psychedelic therapists really use holotropic breathwork as an entree into this work. So I want to end really with honoring both of you and thanking you very much for the role that you played in my life and the lives of so many. Thank you.
So our final two speakers this evening, and for anybody who's familiar with Stan and Christina's work, know that art is something that you both are extremely fond of and work with, and we're fortunate to have two beautiful works of art that are part of tonight's honoring and tribute. And the artwork that you're about to see, of course the artist unfortunately couldn't be here, but we do have someone speaking in for that, for Alex and Allison Gray, Brian Wallace and Maps.
Wow, inspiring group of people here. Stan and Christina, thank you so much for being the common denominator to bring us all here together tonight, to be the driving force to have us here. I'll admit that I've never unveiled a painting before, so I'm just going to pull the drape here and let Alex and Allison take it from here. Thank you.
We sent our love and all the blessings of creative spirit that have always been with you. We're so grateful for the amazing work that you've brought to light in your lives. I was working at Harvard Medical School, and realms of the human unconscious came into the library, and I was one of the first to read it, and it was amazing because it, for the first time, brought a kind of, I thought, very viable cartography of the infinite dimensions that occur in the psychedelic state. Here, at long last, there was someone willing to start to chart what that means, all these dimensions of mind. And so I fell in love with the work immediately. And then he came to Harvard to present his work at Harvard University. And so I was there to hear him talk about this new book and his mapping of the realms of the human unconscious. It was 1979 that Stan invited us to exhibit at the 5th International Transpersonal Psychology Conference that was in Danvers, Massachusetts. And we exhibited Sacred Mirrors there for the first time they were ever exhibited.
I was going to say how honored I felt and Alex felt to be entrusted with that. You were really, given a very special spot, and people just lined up to stand in front of the first 4 sacred mirrors that were ever painted, and just kind of everybody wanted to resonate with the paintings, and it was a really, great audience for that work. Surprisingly wonderful. That was the first time I remember meeting Stan Grof.
This is Stanislav Grof, MD, cartographer of inner space. Stan is not only one of the world's greatest psychologists, psychiatrists, cartographers of the mind, but he's also an artist who is able to make his own drawings and things and to illustrate his points. So down here we have illustrated this kind of archetypal birth perinatal matrix. The happy, snug, safe womb, and then the no exit kind of, the world is crushing me, BPM 2, and then BPM 3 when there's this kind of violent, cathartic transition, and the breakdown of things and breakthrough of things. And then this new identity, this opening up into a new life, a new phase of existence. So here it's suggesting that humanity is going through a kind of birth pangs now, and our possibility is toward a more planetary civilization, realizing that we're in a cosmic game. Here we have a kind of Kundalini and serpentine swirl that results in a proboscis-like serpent nose. So the nose is inspiring and expiring in because the use of the breath and holotropic breath work is such a vital and important part. And Christina showing up there as a guiding spirit. And he's, of course, had this strong connection with the world's spiritual and meditative traditions and relationships throughout that entire area as well. So the whole transpersonal psychology field has incorporated all world mysticism. And this is one of the great offerings that transpersonal psychology, and particularly what Stan has brought to the field, has, I think it's been a great gift to the world. Here we have the father of psychiatry, basically Sigmund Freud, and part of the foundation of Grof's training, and then Jung, who was dealing with the archetypal dimensions that and more sacred dimensions that have been woven into Stan's model. Then Otto Rahn, who talked about the trauma of birth as well as the art and artists. And then the little vial of LSD that sort of woke Stan up in the middle of his medical school training and set him on a journey that has left the world better off. We honor you, Stan. Thank you, Stan.
Send their love, and unfortunately couldn't be here with us tonight. They were here earlier in the weekend. We had a chance to meet with them. And you may notice, as well as the amazing painting that Alex has created for this evening, we have another artist who has created a beautiful piece of glass that we're about to hear from. So if we could invite this artist, Logan McSporn, to the stage. Thank you for creating this.
Hey guys, I am not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm a glassblower from Asheville, North Carolina, and I've been working with MAPS for about 6 years now in various fundraising capacities. Most notably, I make stands and displays for Sasha's artware or labware that he donates to MAPS very generously. The reason I'm here tonight, of course, is to honor Stan and Christina and their vast contributions to our cause. When Rick first asked me to make this a Lifetime Achievement Award, of course I leapt at the opportunity. It's technically the most challenging thing I've ever made. But more importantly, I made it because of the profound impact that Stan and Christina have had on my life. And LSD, I have to admit. It's had everything. It's had such an impact on my life, my spirituality, my work, my artwork, my relationships, my position and place in the universe and on the planet. And the sculpture itself is a phoenix, and it's I'm sure you guys recognize Stan's LSD psychotherapy book. Stan designed this, so I just copied his artwork, and it turned out okay. But I think the Phoenix is a really good symbol for where we are as an organization right now. We are rising from the ashes of repression and prohibition, and I think that the Western world is finally coming to terms with the fact that we might have something to teach them. We might have something to give back to them, and a message that many of us have learned from the medicines that we take. And it's such an honor to be able to express my gratitude and respect in such a tangible way to Stan and Christina. And I have so many thanks for them for a lifetime of dedication and a sustained vision in spite of all the obstacles that I'm sure they've faced over the years. And may your work continue to shape lives and worlds for eons to come. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, and friends and beloveds, we have heard, I'm sure, just a taste of the stories of the inspiration and the transformation that all of us have undergone as a result of the work of Stan and Christina. And I know everyone here has their own story of, in some way, they've been touched. And it is, at this time, my great honor and privilege to welcome our guests of honor to the stage to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, Stan and Christina Grof. Logan, I think they want to take a picture with you. Please come on up. And anyone's welcome to take pictures. If you want to get your cameras up, please, you're welcome to take pictures.
all the people who've said such wonderful things about us. It's not often at dinner time that we get to hear such wonderful commentary about who we are. And I found that you drew tears several times as we were sitting there. And also, thank you so much to Max for this beautiful award. Am I hearing music all the way through this? Where is it coming from? Party! Okay, so it wasn't just me. I blew glass for a while in another life. Nothing like that. I want to say, first of all, congratulations to MAPS for 25 years of existence. For 25 years of growing internationally, and I understand 24 different countries are represented here at this conference. Thank you for your visioning and for your teamwork. My first encounter with Rick was at Esalen, and he was, I guess they say, a bright-eyed boy with cheek of tan. And he practically levitated as he told us about his dreams of helping psychotherapy become a reality again. Rick and I had a little moment when his overflowing enthusiasm leaked into a Life magazine article about a month-long, some psychedelic use in a month-long seminar that Stan and I had given, and we began those 4-week seminars with an announcement there would be no illegal drugs involved in this program. So I, for a moment, became a mama tiger and mentioned something about walking that line between working with far out ideas and materials and maps, and also talking about it in a way that and working with it in a way that other people could hear and perhaps even accept. I've watched Stan walk that line with his short haircut and his tie and jackets over the many years. Walking into the Harvard Science Center and giving a talk on physics and transpersonal psychology and the psychedelic maps and people nodding their heads. I'm an audience watcher, so I watched the people nodding their heads, very straight scientific types, and first thing I knew, they were reading his books. So as Rick's and our lives sort of continued, it was almost as though Rick had created a goal for himself and then realized the steps that he needed to take to get to that goal. I don't know that it happened in such a linear way, but I'm so moved, Rick, by what, are you there? Yes, there you are. By what you and the teams of people you've worked with over these years have created. You've reached some of your dreams. You have more to fulfill. I know you've had very boring tasks, such as fundraising and depressing moments where you get a no from somebody that has to do with red tape, and also the kind of kick your heels and jump up and down moments when a program is accepted and you hear of yet another instance of legalized
work with psychedelics. I'm just so very touched by your efforts over these years. I know you've not worked alone, but you've had our support and love all through, and that continues. So Godspeed to you and all the people that you work with, all the mass people here present and in other places in the world. I feel so privileged to be accepted into the psychedelic and transpersonal worlds, to be out as a seeker of the spirit, to find homes for non-ordinary experiences I've been having since I was a child, to find an intellectual and emotional and spiritual language I didn't know I knew how to speak, among the multiple gifts that you as a transpersonal and psychedelic and forward-thinking and deeply loving community have given to me. I took to work with non-ordinary states very easily because I had experienced many myself, and I knew the territory. So working in our work with holotropic breathwork, working with other people, working with people in spiritual emergencies, and conceiving the ideas of an alternative to the psychiatric treatment of people going through the process of awakening or transformation in a sympathetic, warm, psychologically sophisticated and open-hearted context, rather than in a psychiatric hospital where they were tranquilized or given labels. And also I've been attracted to work and have spent the last 25 years of my professional life working in the area of recovery from addictions and trauma, especially from childhood sexual abuse. I also, as Roger Walsh mentioned, I also have been through that heroes or heroines journey of hitting bottom, and have everything fall apart, have nothing left, and coming then into a whole new life. My work with Joseph Campbell in college, where he was my teacher and my mentor and my friend until his death. He gave me the hero's journey, which is a map that we continue to follow. I follow as a guiding map for myself. We followed the idea of taking the journey and getting through the rough spots and coming out the other side. We followed that map in our marriage. We've been together now 36 years. Stan wanted me to mention the work we did with psychedelics in Canada briefly. That was in the fall of 1976 when we had been together for just about a year. And we got a letter from the director of this Institute for the Treatment of Alcoholism and Other Addictions in Toronto. And this man, the director, had worked with psychedelics when they were legal and had some Sandoz pure LSD in his safe. And he was very interested in continuing the work that Stan had done with Skid Row alcoholics in his studies. So they invited us up to Toronto, and we co-led sessions with many members of the staff that were held in the director's basement, and this was all legal at the time. And Stan also gave a series of lectures to the staff to prepare them to then, the hope was to continue the work with patients. Unfortunately, the word spread to a local major newspaper in Toronto, and the trustees of the Donwood Institute decided that they didn't think it was such a good idea to continue with this project, so it was shut down. Yeah, they stopped the financial support for the program. So this was my entry into work with psychedelics, and I have to tell you, I have lived with, Stan has had 2 mistresses in his life with me. One is his computer. We don't have, I have had certain names for that computer over the years. I don't even know if she's female, but he spends hours with her, or him. And the other is psychedelics. I have the privilege of living with this man who I adore, who is so patient and so loving and so warm. And there's this European reserve at first for some people, but very soon you see beyond that layer to the warm, cuddly, big bear behind the facade. He's been loving and steady and patient and a kind partner for all these years through ups and downs, and many more ups and many more downs. And so it goes. He's standing here just having had back surgery. But I want to say that in his heart, living with him all of these years, the work that he did with psychedelics and the thinking he has done and writing that he has done about his observations have occupied a great deal of our life. And even if I will say, as I have once or twice, maybe in this book you could talk about the experiences more broadly and leave out the psychedelic part, for a wider, more general audience. He won't do it. He's so loyal to this work. He's been so loyal to this work, which makes this whole thing, and tonight, and being honored tonight, kind of come full circle. It's been, to see maps growing and expanding and doing what you're doing so beautifully and artfully and carefully is just so very exciting to me and to my beloved. And I get to call him my beloved.
Christina said much of what I would have said at the beginning of my talk, expressing my deep gratitude to Rick Lublin for the work that he and his team have done over the years to really bring about this global renaissance of interest in psychedelic research and finding the funding for it. He's an absolute musician. And I would also like to thank you for the very heartfelt opening of this evening. I'm very sorry that I couldn't be here for the opening. As Christina mentioned, I had in October a back operation, and I have to divide my life very carefully between standing and lying and walking, and this would have been too much of a challenge. And also, if you saw me avoiding sort of more crowded areas and being very protective against bear hugs, which is not my usual behavior, that is the explanation. This evening has been an extraordinary, moving experience for me. One of the reasons was of seeing so many friends at various adventures in consciousness with us over the years at different places in the world and different times, and bringing back all these memories in a form of a life review. And it felt a little like what people experience in near-death experiences, where there are these important memories kind of emerge, and you can also get a review of whole life. It was particularly important for me that I'm sharing it with Christina. He was there in all these adventures through the years, and with a kind of inspiring views. There are many areas into which I wouldn't have really delved that deeply, particularly the area of spiritual emergency and the problems related to alcoholism and addiction. If she were not a living laboratory, and with all these amazing attitudes that were so wonderfully emphasized by Roger Walsh. This conference and this celebration brought me back somehow 40 years to a period 40 years ago when those of us who were working with psychedelics were just struck by the mass hysteria and by the irrational legislature that's effectively stopped research of psychedelics all over the world. And those of us who had the privilege to learn the effects of these substances had the feeling of incredible loss for psychiatry and psychology. The disciplines lost by far the most interesting and important tool in the entire history of these disciplines. Rick mentioned that I compared LSD once to telescope and microscope, so to me it seemed that it was a situation similar to what would have happened had not using the microscope or the telescope be allowed in those disciplines. So the effects of psychedelics are extremely unique, particularly LSD. There's never been a substance that was somehow found useful in so many different areas. It started the whole golden era of psychoneuropharmacology, meaning the science of consciousness. Incredible insights into neuroreceptors and transmitters and so on. An amazing tool for psychotherapy, accelerating, deepening psychotherapy, making it possible to work with clients who were not accessible to other methods, chronic alcoholics, drug addicts, criminal recidivists, and so on. The incredible effect that LSD and other psychedelics had on creativity as a way of powerful spiritual opening. So this was an amazing loss, and it took a very long time. And it's really thanks to MAPS and particularly Rick and Dublin that we now are experiencing this renaissance where psychedelic research is returning, and let's hope that this trend will continue. What has mostly been emphasized recently is the therapeutic work, and also the work that has been done on somehow supporting the results of the Good Friday experiment, the possibility of inducing mystical experiences. But I hope that this research will continue into other areas which I would be particularly interested in. One of those areas is creativity. Francis Crick admitted that LSD helped him in breaking the code of the DNA molecule. Carrie Mullis said the same about the discovery that somehow was awarded by a Nobel Prize, which was the polymerase chain. It's well known that psychedelics played an important role in the history of the computer and also virtual reality. So I hope we really be able to move into these areas. I would like to use this opportunity to express my deep gratitude for the portrait. I'm sorry I have no chance to talk back to Alex and Alison. I will have to do it on another occasion. But another thing that I would like to do is to express my profound gratitude to Albert Hoffman. He's certainly my spiritual father. His work had amazingly profound impact on my personal life, and my professional life. And I think I would like to end here just giving you three little stories about my own personal experiences with Albert. I first met him when he visited us at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center to find out what research we were doing. And after he spent some time with our staff, he wanted to see Washington. And I became his driver and his guide in Washington, and we went to see the Capitol and the reflecting pool that Washington was, making monuments. And then he wanted to see the White House. So I took him to the White House, and I pulled to the curb, which at the time was still possible. And he rolled down the window and put his hands on the edge of the glass and said, "So this is a great White House where important people like Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew make decisions that change the course of the world." I said, "Do you realize, what the impact you had on the world is compared to Spiro Agnew?" So an amazing example of humility. Another experience which I would like to mention actually happened in the context of our training. We made connections with Hans-Ulrich Giger, who you might know as the artist responsible for the Alien. And so we had a holotropic breathwork training there on fantastic realism, and we invited Albert for one day, and we had his presentation and panel discussion. And this was in September, and the next year in January, he had his 100th birthday, so he was almost 100 years old. And he was intellectually extremely active, and he talked a lot about how chemistry that goes into the creation of the pigment that give flower, the colors to flowers and to butterfly wings. And so if anybody thinks that the atoms can do it all by themselves, they don't know what they're talking about. We kind of walked out of that session with the feeling that we just attended a darshan of an Indian guru. I will mention also the last experience which I had with Albert, which was the Psychedelic Forum in Basel, and he was actually still supposed to be a presenter in that conference, but at that point, he 102 years old, he was not able to do it, and he invited Anthony Giger and his wife Carmen and myself, and Stefan was helping them for an afternoon to his private home. And at that time, he already saw that there was a renaissance, that his dream was coming true, that psychedelics were again returning, and he talked at some length about what he called sort of new Eleusinian mysteries. The Eleusinian mystery is an incredible role in Greek culture. We all see Greece as kind of a cradle of civilization, and the Greeks had all sorts of very interesting ideas, and it's never mentioned that for almost 2,000 years, every 5 years, there were these Eleusinian mysteries where initiates experience death and rebirth. And as Albert and his co-workers, Gordon Wasson and Rack, found out that Kikyo, which was the beverage which was being used in these mysteries, was actually an ergot derivative, very related to LSD. So Albert talked at length about his vision for this new Eleusinian mysteries that somehow, hopefully, psychedelics in the future will be incorporated into modern society with the same beneficial effects that they had in ancient Greece. So again, I would like to there was something extremely moving that happened in this afternoon. At one point, Albert brought out the book, The Ultimate Journey, which, among others, describes the work with cancer patients.